Welcome to Clubs Made Meaningful from Susner. This is a show about building clubs that people love, where strategy, culture, and brand come together to create real belonging. Let's dive in.
Derek, we had a conversation a few weeks back about the first 90 days of onboarding a member. And that was really interesting as we looked through the first 90 days of a member's journey and thinking about it not as just you are a member, you aren't a member. You kind of have to be led into that experience and kind of trained into who you are and who we are and how we're all about that. A couple months ago, you did an article with the team at KK&W about that in terms of general managers. And that's what I want to talk about today, the shift of how a general manager comes on board, what they should be looking at, and just what the opportunity is as they come onto a new club and figure out what's wrong and what's not.
Similar paths, but I think there's some overlap, but two very different conversations. What is critical to do in the first 90 days when a member comes on board to make sure that we're overcoming buyer's remorse. We're giving them the best chance possible to become advocates of our club, passionate about our club. We talk all the time about how new members are our primary sales force and referring more new members. But we're working with one of the clubs that we work with is their general manager just retired and they just brought on a new general manager. So this is also super top of mind in addition to and by the way, that article is in Boardroom Magazine online. If you're interested in checking out the long form of that, which is, I think, insightful into basically the opportunity that a club has with its GM, or let me flip that around, the opportunity the GM has at a new club in that first 90 days to really get off on not just the right foot, but the right foot that might set the next several or many years.
Right. I think most boards that I've come across treat a GM transition as more of an operational succession. They say, I got to find the right leader. We got to complete the handoff to this new person. And then we just got to return to what we are now and just return to normal. And the argument that article made, and the argument that I believe is true as well, is that your new normal should be an elevated form of what normal is, because the general manager should really come in and assess the situation and figure out where things were blinded, right? When a general manager works at a club for 5, 10, 15 years, they start becoming blinded to all of the opportunities that could improve the experience. And that's basically what we're talking about here.
Yeah, I think of the scratch on the wall right over here next to me that I noticed it right away, but the second time I noticed it less, and now I don't even notice it at all until, somebody comes over and goes, "Hey, what's with that scratch on that wall?" I think it's an incredible opportunity. So you usually pose these questions. Let me pose the first one to you. What is it about the first 90 days specifically of a general manager's tenure at a club that's new to them that's different from any other period in that club's life?
And I kind of compare this to when a new president comes into office. They expect the first 100 days where a lot of stuff happens. And I'd say the opposite is true with a really good GM transition, is that almost nothing happens in the first 90 days because the opportunity is to take everything in, dig into the weeds, and find all of the things. That's like an inspector, going back to your house thing. It's like an inspector walking around the house and just putting a little Post-it note next to all of the little things that are like, well, that's wrong. This is off. That hinge is wrong. To me, that's the big opportunity here. And what makes it different is that the 90 days where this transition happens is when a club has the opportunity to be the most vulnerable in a good way, to say, we aren't perfect. We are transitioning. We are doing something different. And this 90 days represents let's self-assess. Let's do a better job than what we currently do. Let's talk about the things that we don't normally talk about, or maybe things that haven't been talked about in a really long time here, because we've hired a new person who we believe will take on this opportunity and really drive us forward. If that person's the right person, they're going to take this 90 days and show you all of the amazing things that this club can do.
You never have a second opportunity to make a first impression. And while the club, I'm sure, and the board or the committee who's hired the new GM, I'm sure they're on their best behavior. And once that's done and the GM's hired and announced, I get operationally, they're going to be, we talk about drinking through a fire hose. I mean, I can't imagine the quantity of operational information they're going to take in around how we do it, how we do this, how we order, how we hire, etc. But it's the visionary GMs that we've met with or had the opportunity to talk to or work with that spend that 90 days figuring out who are we as a club, so that as I'm understanding and get up to speed on how we do it today, I have the opportunity for this one time to run it through this lens of, well, does how we do it make sense based on who we are? It's not unusual for a GM, like you said, who's been there for 15 years, especially one who's announced their retirement, who's starting to wind down and ready for that successor. They're COOs. They make things happen and they fall into a rhythm, and things that work well, they keep doing what works well. But I don't know how often one steps back and says, well, I know this is the way we've always done it, but is this the way we should be doing it?
I think our experience with corporate clients in a past world has really helped me understand the importance of this. When we saw CEO transitions or COO transitions and they moved forward, it became really interesting because we worked with one that I thought was really great, and he came in and he spent the first 90 days just observing. And at the end of the 90 days, he gave I don't know if it was a half an hour or 45-minute keynote type situation to the company. So that would be like the general manager coming back to the entire membership and saying, here's what I've found in 90 days, and here's what I want to work on moving forward to improve this club. That's something I haven't seen yet in club world, is like treating this as though we can improve, we can be kind of, like I said, vulnerable earlier, or being a little humble and say, we can be better than we are today. That's what I would really love to see a general manager come do, because they have the opportunity to do that. You don't have anyone to offend. You have no political background on that. You don't really know the membership at that point, but to show them that you're really driving change, but not just changing for change's sake, but changing for a specific reason, I think is really important.
Yeah, I mean, if we often look at the lens internally of what's going well, what can we do better, and what are the things that we can do to achieve that better. But how do you define what better is?
Right.
Operationally, better might be more efficient. It might be doing something in less hours, less waste, more profit. All those sort of table stakes things. But I imagine all the low hanging fruit that a new GM walking in and really experiencing things for the first time with eyes wide open in that first impression, the opportunity for all of the things that they see that everybody else who's been doing it day to day takes for granted, because that's the way we've always done it. And what an amazing opportunity. I'm sure, I'm not a GM and I haven't been one, but I have to imagine the good ones, that's the lens that they're coming in here with anyway.
So if a board is vetting a GM candidate beforehand, because I've heard this before where they go, well, why don't you just come with solutions? Well, I've hired you. You know what's going on. Why don't you just come with solutions? Why would you wait 90 days to start solving those problems?
Yeah, great question. Short of that general manager having to wrap up their obligations at their previous job, maybe they're limited in what they can do, but that doesn't limit what the board can do. The board should have clarity on who we are. I mean, let's just give them credit that they've done the hard work of defining who they are, who they're for, what the future of this club looks like, so that when they actually vetted and chose that GM to lead them, they chose somebody who they believe will pick up that vision and not just carry it forward, but lead it, so the board can step back and do what the proper role of a board is in supporting that general manager in leading the organization towards that vision.
What I think the big challenge with boards is to understand that the problem isn't always the problem. And that the problem that we're talking about could be a symptom of a deeper problem. The general manager's job at that first 90 days is to dig into what are symptoms and what are problems. And I think that a member is not going to know all the ins and outs of the operational side of things. And that's what really becomes this giving someone a chance to sink their teeth in and really understand it and really dig into it and really figure out, what is my culture like from a working side? What is our staff expectations? What kind of training do we give people? That's stuff that just can't be learned unless you're on site working through all of these different things and having conversations with different people. I've talked to another GM who started their tenure at a club where he said, I just met with members and staff members and other groups of people for 90 days. I just spent a ton of time talking to people to understand, get the full scope of it. Is not too dissimilar to what we do when we try to get to know a club. It's more conversational. It's more getting to understand what someone means by what they say, not necessarily exactly what they say. And that's what I think boards need to be patient about. And it can become really hard because you just want, so I've hired someone, I want them to solve the problem today. But if a general manager is going to last a long time, they need to understand the full scope of what they're getting into and how they can support it and improve it.
I was looking back at the article that, we co-authored before we got on here. There was a great line in here that says culture reveals itself through behavior, not through policy. And so while we can share with this new general manager what the club's policies are, they need those first 90 days to understand what the current culture is, not just to understand, who we are, what our values are, what our spirit's like, but I think to see where we're not only aligned and what's already working well, but to start looking at where we're misaligned. Imagine them like consuming member satisfaction surveys, and there's complaints about food and beverage. And so the instant solution is to change the menu and swap out, the burger for a different burger. But to your point, that wasn't the problem. The problem was if you had asked and dug in and understood the behavior, it's the behavior of that specific culture of that club, that what they were actually missing was the experience. The club was focused on serving food so fast because they thought that the members wanted it fast. What they ended up missing was the engagement and the interaction and the charm and the fact that I didn't come here for fast food. I came here for a meal, for an experience, to enjoy my time here. And so that diagnosis had been wrong, but through fresh eyes by, like you said, getting past that initial problem, which was a symptom, was able to dig a bit deeper by witnessing the actual behavior of the membership and the staff.
There's a really great book called Alchemy that our office has read, and that gets into, the problem that you're identifying might not always be the problem. And I think that's really what I get into with the first 90 days of a general manager, because in that book, they go through a study around trains in Europe, and people say, do you want your train to be faster, or do you just want your train to be more hospitable to you? And they found that to make the train faster, it costs billions and billions of dollars to redo the entire network. But just to make the train have Wi-Fi and to have the seats have more cushions on them costs, a couple $1,000s. And so that difference of making people's experience better isn't always what they tell you. They don't always get to what the nuance is. And that's what I think is really important. But if you've given someone 90 days and you're on the board, what should you be paying attention to? If you're saying, did we make the right hire? Did we do the right thing? Is our general manager helping us move forward? What types of things should they be looking at in which you can say, yes, that is the right way to go about the first 90 days?
That's a great question. I would love to kind of be a fly on the wall in that board or the executive committee meeting who's talking about that and gathering that list of guidance for that GM to pass that off. There's two sides of it. One side is, how do we look at our culture, assuming we've established who we are, what we're for, our values, etc. Understanding and watching how the new general manager absorbs those and embraces those, maybe even challenges those, and says, "Hey, I know you guys keep saying that you're all about this, but when I see two sides, when I see how you guys treat each other or act around here, or B, externally, when I see how you're expressing your brand in the market and to potential members, there's some places where I see really strong synergies where you're doing a really great job, but I also see some areas where you're not telling the right story, or the story's getting lost, or you're not telling a story at all." And I think if that board is doing their job and has a really strong grasp of those two things, then to watch and make sure that the GM's also identifying both the inward and the external are two, immediate pieces that I think I would be paying attention to.
When I get into that transitional phase, if I was a board member, the success mark I would say is, are they having lots and lots of conversations? And if they are clearly meeting with a million people and talking about a lot of things, like that's what I would think is really important, is getting really ingrained into what we're all about here and how does that all work. And then two, if you came out of that 90 days with a priority list of things that you think we should work on in the short term and the long term. So having two separate lists that are like, short term, this is what we're going to work on this season. This is what we think we can do to improve our baseline for experience. How do we raise the bar? That is our floor for how good the experience can be here. And long term, here are the things that I believe operationally will make this club a special place to be. And how do I bring that to the board and have them understand that? It's a two-way street, right? It takes a GM who wants to do all of those things and is really excited about change and wants to improve the operations. And then it takes a board to embrace that change and to be comfortable with being told you're not the greatest club in the world, and being comfortable with things that you might have thought were perfect that might be better if you just open your opportunity on it. And I think that can become really difficult.
I had the opportunity to talk with a member at a club who he led the executive search committee that found and vetted and hired their brand new GM. And we were talking casually and asked him how it went. And he basically said, "It went good. I'm exhausted. I will never do that again. I hope I never have to go through that. Man, that was a lot of work. I had no idea how much work that was going to be to really make sure, I was doing right by my club." And I'm curious if that person who's maybe also on the board is exhausted now. He's done his work, he's done his job,
Right.
and now they brought in a GM who's not a first-time GM. So that person, there's a risk that person might assume that because this GM, we vetted them, we've hired them, we believe in them, they've said all the right things, we've hired them, and now they're coming in, that we can just kind of step off, fade away, and assume that they're going to do the right thing because they've done this before. And frankly, I haven't. I haven't been a part of the club that's hired a new GM before, so I'm going to assume that they know what's going on. What happens then? What happens, or what are the risks when a club treats this moment then as routine, or takes for granted that the GM knows what they're doing, versus being a little bit more strategic? And, climbing the top of Everest is only halfway. You got to get back down. So I would say hiring that GM is halfway. Now let's get them onboarded.
Right. The visual I always use with clubs in general is a moving walkway. You never ever been to an airport, moving walkway, going the one way. But clubs are going the opposite way on a moving walkway. That's just how it works. And what happens is if you just stand still, you end up going backwards slowly. And that relevance goes away. And if you just walk, then you're going to maintain where you're at. When if you run, you're going to, take and make a lot out of it. And so when it comes to a general manager transition, if you're telling them, don't worry about it, like, here's how we do things, do not rock the boat type of a situation, you really risk relevance. Is that right for us? Is that how we've always done it? Is that actually the right way to do it as we look forward? Then the second part is you risk its opportunity cost. Think about what could be done versus what you guys always do, if you're not even opening the door to what could be done, that's opportunity cost. You're costing your club the opportunity to be a better club. And I would say most board members don't want to do that. They don't think in terms like that, but I think that when you go into a general manager who has a ton of experience or doesn't have a ton of experience, I think it matters more on how you set the tone for what your expectations are in those first 90 days. And so if your expectation is, we want you to get up to speed so that you can keep running things the way they've always been ran, that's going to result in a lack of relevance moving forward. Because, if a facility has been ran the same way for 50 years, I can guarantee you there's at least one small thing, even if it's minor, that is probably not relevant anymore. And so that's basically what you're offering. And then you're also setting the culture for that GM moving forward, in which it's, we don't improve, we maintain. And that to me becomes really dangerous, because say that GM is there for 15 years, you move on to the next GM and maybe they're there for 15 more years. And so you have 30 years of just doing things the same way, while technology and memberships and expectations and everything else is changing. And to say that your culture is to maintain is almost to say that we don't care about the next generation.
Everybody has their own kind of mini agenda. The golfers are coming in saying, "Hey, we would love to do this," or the course, when are we going to get that irrigation done? Now I've got fresh ears. The old GM wasn't listening to me. I'm going to make sure I plead my case to renovate the bar and renovate the restaurant. And so he's battling, or he's handling all this. And of course, they hired somebody who's awesome, so he's dealing with it very diplomatically. But you said this right out of the gate. What if the board gives this person time? What if they give them the first 90 days to diagnose and to learn us, and identify the things that need to change, but maybe also at the same time to reaffirm some of the things about us that are great, that we can then make sure we continue to lean into, not just to come in because we're broken, but to come in because we're actually have some nice momentum and we are walking on that walkway,
right,
and to help us pick up the pace a little bit. If we swamp them with, without letting them diagnose, it's going to be hard for them to give them the space to prescribe something that's going to help us in the long term versus just continuing to make short-term personal preference decision.
I agree that I think that the sentiment most often, it's not always the case that a club is struggling, that's why the GM moves on, right? It could be because of retirement. It could be because of a lot of different things. They could have, family differences. They might just not be a good fit, and that's totally fine too. But to say there's always this forward momentum if a GM does it right. And what I think the critical piece of 90 days is to ensure that there is forward momentum after that transition. Whether you had it before or not, as long as that 90 days passes and you have a directional, here's what we're going to work on to be better, and this aligns with who we are, that to me would be a win.
And that means it's a two-way conversation. It's
Right.
not the GM coming in and the board saying, "This is what you're going to do. This is who we are," etc. You said it before, which I think is brilliant. It's being vulnerable and open to challenge and exploration, and to be open to the perspective from this new person who's going to see us. They maybe have seen us from the outside. They've learned about us during their vetting, during the interview process, but now we're actually bringing them in, opening everything, opening the closets, the books, and to really, truly use that as a once in a very long time opportunity to be vulnerable and to let that person in, to allow them to then make those strategic decisions. It's not unlike, when we're working with a club and, they've hired us to come in and we're starting to work through our discovery and strategy process. Well, you can't make a strategic direction with your expertise if that club that we're working with isn't vulnerable enough to share with you what the actual challenges are. Sometimes, yeah, it's an opportunity, but most times it's one of 5 problems or issues that we see, and for us to properly diagnose it so that you can make a strategic direction means that they have to be vulnerable to say, yeah, we're not perfect. And I don't know what the solution is. That's why we're talking to you, but we think there's an opportunity for us to do better here. That vulnerability is hard though,
Right.
especially if there is a loud voice in the room or on the board or on that committee who,
Yeah.
we have to diagnose that same thing.
I think that a GM's job is not easy at all. I mean, you have 300 bosses. That's the hardest part. And the really good GMs recognize that that's not the case, but it feels like that all the time, right? And it feels like, I have to listen to all these people because they're paying my salary and this is how this all works. But when you step out of that and you look at the club as an entity and you say, I'm trying to do the best for this organization, not the best for that member, not the best for this member, not the best for this group of members. Like you said, the Saturday morning golf group. I'm not doing the best for them. I'm doing the best for everybody. And what that means is that some people aren't going to be happy with the decisions that get made. Some people aren't going to like that we switch from paper towels to towels in the bathroom. And some people are going to say, that's a no-brainer. Of course we should do that. And what happens with a GM is that as long as they make decisions that are tied to direction and who we are and what we aspire to be as a club, then you're in the right place and your heart's in the right place. And what you're doing is strategic and right versus the people who just listen to the guy who's the most upset in the boardroom because he thought that he was going to get a Himalayan putting green and now he doesn't have one and there's now a new tennis court. It's really upsetting and all this other stuff. And so it's a really hard job. I think that when I get into a bunch of jobs I don't want to have, general manager is one of them, but it's not because I don't think they have a lot of power and they don't have a lot of opportunity. I just think that they're pressured on a lot of different ways. And it's a great job. It's a cool job. I really liked GMs that I've met and worked with, but it's a hard one.
In a couple of months, this new GM that I'm talking about, see if we'll invite him on the podcast and talk about that first 90-day experience and what they learned and do a follow-up on this conversation and get an inside perspective. I think that could be helpful to our listeners.
Thanks for the conversation, Derek. It's a great article. If anyone hasn't read it, it's like you said, Boardroom Magazine. I think it's called The Importance of the First 90 Days, New GM, New Direction. So there's a great article in there. It's split between you and the team at KKNW. They give their expertise on just all of the finding and hiring of general managers and kind of how that whole process works and what they look for in a great general manager when they're looking for opportunities. It's a perspective that we can't really provide, but it's really, really helpful.
Awesome. We will see you guys you'll listen to us next time. Thanks for joining. At Susner, we help private clubs build brands that create belonging. If this episode resonated with you, please share it with someone in your club world. And until next time, let's create something worth celebrating. The Clubs Made Meaningful.